I honestly think that loneliness is the theme of our time. I think we talk a lot about generative AI and social media and so on, but I think 100 years from now, looking back into the 2000s, this is going to be the age of loneliness.
Welcome to Season 16 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Jeremy Adamson, who is a leader in AI and analytics strategy and has a broad range of experience in retail, aviation, energy, financial services, and public administration. Jeremy holds an MBA from the University of Calgary and a master's in engineering from the University of New Brunswick. He is the author of Geeks with Empathy, a book that explores his belief that the successful technology workers of the future will not be the best coders, but those who can best empathize with their customers and coworkers. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me, Anita.
I want to begin our conversation. I usually ask guests what brings them to this moment and why they are doing work that is connected to empathy. And when I opened up your book, I knew the answer. So if you'll indulge, I'd like to read from the introduction of your book.
Yeah, of course.
So here is a set of sentences in quotes. So it's a back and forth conversation, beginning, he said you were a turnip. A turnip? Yes, a turnip. He said I wasted 45 minutes of his time by setting up that meeting with you. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He just didn't understand how much better this approach is. I saw your deck. All you did was prove that you are better at math than he is. Was that your goal? Was that what you were hoping to get out of it? If it wasn't, then you're not nearly as smart as you think you are. I didn't realize it at the time, but that conversation marked the most transformative moment of my career. After dedicating a year of my life to developing a new predictive model with both financial and social benefits, my mentor arranged an opportunity for me to present my findings to a senior executive within our organization. I had rehearsed and polished the presentation deck, entering the meeting with unwavering confidence. Every bullet was meticulously aligned, and every number was triple checked. Shortly after the presentation, I received a note requesting a visit to my mentor's office to discuss the outcome. Expecting praise for my exceptional presentation, I was caught completely off guard when I was instead labeled a turnip. After several days of reflection, I came to acknowledge the validity of my mentor's critique. The aim of the presentation was to facilitate the implementation of the project. I needed to sell my idea to my stakeholder, but I was trying to sell it to myself. And then I'll just skip to the main obstacle to unlocking real value within technology teams has been an absence of mutual understanding with the business stakeholders. It has been a lack of empathy. So I think that kind of sums up the pivotal moment when you had the insight that, empathy matters. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and why you think empathy is so important?
Yeah, that was a little surreal. That's actually the first time I've heard my book read back to me. But yeah, that was a really a key moment. And I've shared that story with a lot of people over the years, and I think a lot of us need to fall off the bike and skin our knee before we come to that realization ourselves. But I've struggled so much with it. I think by my disposition, and I'm probably representative of most people in this field. I'm very systematic, very logic driven. And when I get in front of stakeholders, I instinctively try to sell them the same way that I was sold. I talk about the solution, all the sophistication behind it, how much better it is. And I never really think, unless I'm intentional about it, what I'm trying to get out of this interaction. And I think that that's where I need to stop myself and where I try to encourage other people that we need to sell it to them based on their motivations, based on what's important to them, and try to head off the worries and concerns that they may have. And without empathy, that's all impossible. We live in completely different worlds. So it takes an awful lot of intentional effort, but I think it's much more rewarded than pursuing more technical certificates, which is what we tend to do.
Love it. And it kind of
Yeah.
speaks to this idea of a little bit of design thinking, because the design thinking process, whether it's a product or service, is the user at the center to understand the needs and pain points of the user. And so in your case, you're kind of saying I could have designed my presentation with the user in mind, that is the senior person that could make it happen. I love that story. Very, very powerful with tons of humility. And I'm it makes you a bona fide expert at making the switch, knowing what it's like to actually, change the way you do things with that learning in mind. I know that you also think that technology workers have strained relationships in their workplace with their colleagues. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, it's I think we got here honestly. I don't think it's ill will on either side. It's more of a consequence, I would say, how we've responded organizationally to these failures, like even the one that I just described. And today, if you were to ask for a new number to be added to a report from your business intelligence team, you wanted the number of Twitter followers over a day put onto your scorecard. It sounds easy and it should be easy. Um, and what would happen in practice is you would talk to the marketing, social reporting product owner. They would confirm their understanding and they would try to understand themselves how that's going to fit into, the product that they own. In the background, though, that's going to go to a backlog owned by a product manager. A few months later, that's going to go to the leader of the BI team. They're going to decompose that into a bunch of technical steps. If that has any security implications, that's going to kick off a process with IT, and they'll go through all the same exercise. And on the BI side, when it finally lands with them, it's going to go to a scrum master who's going to deconstruct it even further and put it into an upcoming sprint. So really, by the end of all this process, there's going to be probably a dozen or more people who they don't know you, they don't know what you want, they don't know what the outcome is going to look like, they don't know what you're doing with it, they don't know the original ask. They're going to turn some knobs and spin some wheels, and all their effort is going to be glued together at the end. And 6 months later, you're going to get an email that says, as the business owner, you need to accept this before it goes into production. So, from your perspective, in a situation like that, you ask for one number, and 6 months later, you get this email from someone you don't know saying, take it or leave it. If you don't like it, you got to wait another 6 months. So it's just a bad experience. And you're so far removed from the people that are doing the actual work, you don't even have anybody to talk to. If you're not happy with it, you got to resubmit and wait that time again. And then for their part, even on the other side, for the technology workers, they're so far removed from you that all they've done is a very small, inconsequential task. They don't know who they did it for. They don't know the final output. So we got here honestly. Like I said at the beginning, we're by our nature very logically driven. So when these projects don't work out, our first instinct is to be more systematic and more process driven. We add more process and more steps, and we dehumanize the whole interaction even more. And then on your side, for people in the business, they get accustomed to frustration and excuses. And, you learn to give very clear instructions, and you learn that as you yell at us, we're going to get it done more quickly. So we have a tendency to prioritize, I would say, based on seniority, based on the loudest voice, and we're probably a little scared of responsibility too. So everything we do really reinforces that you need to yell at us to get what you want. And as that happens, we get more and more scared and dejected. So it leads to a case where every failure leads to more structure, less dynamism, more delays, more failures. And I found that that's a death spiral for a lot of technology companies that I've worked for.
If people are listening and nodding their head and they're like, wow, bingo, I so hear you. What are
Mhm.
some of the workarounds to actually mitigate against that from happening?
There's all sorts of things that we can do, and I think, on our side as technology people, we need to be willing to put our head above the parapet and say we want to be evaluated based on the value we create and not based on doing what we're told. And I go into quite a bit of detail in the book about, the misinterpretation of psychological safety. And I think that's really the root of it is that there's a lot of safety in doing exactly what you're told. No one is ever going to blame you because you can always point to someone and say, I did exactly what you told me to do. And there's a lot of safety in that. But at the same time, we are we're replacing the the acute constructive stress of undergoing a big project with a big team behind it. That's, I think, a healthy stress. And we replace that with a chronic, demoralizing, really soul-crushing stress of being behind the scenes, being inconsequential, not feeling like you're making an impact. And I think that that's the biggest one is really turning our mind towards value creation and not technical implementation. And they sound similar, but really there's quite a chasm between them. And the other part, really pointing towards empathy, is the need to understand the posture of the people that are making the ask and trying to contextualize it based on what their needs are. Because the stakeholders always try to speak to us in our own language. We've kind of trained them to be that way. But there's a lot that we can add to what their ask is. A lot of the time, the things that they ask us for, we could improve on. We know more of an efficient way to do it. But as soon as we make that recommendation, or as soon as we offer an interpretation of what they're asking for, that's us starting to take ownership over the results. And I think that that's where we shy away. So being assertive, being empathetic, and really standing up and taking ownership over technology and not just being an order taker, I think is the main thing we need to do. How to get there is a long journey, but that's
And
where we need to go.
so I'm picking up on a lot of stuff where you really want folks in technology to have a sense of agency and a sense of purpose, even though their work is quite technical and maybe incremental towards a larger project. And it kind of raises for me something that at the end of the book you talk about, which is the danger of relying on data to make decisions.
Mm.
I wonder if you could speak to that. And the reason why this is super relevant and salient for me is that I just did an interview with a woman overseas who is an expert in sense making. So human beings are meaning making machines. We make sense of things. And she says that she feels hopeful about the future of humanity because she thinks machines are going to do the work of thinking through decisions. And we as humans are going to be able to rely on the complexity of context, what our body and intuition understands about a situation, higher order needs and values. So I feel like there's some alignment, even though she's coming from a completely non-technical perspective. So could you tell me why relying on data for decision making is kind of scary to you?
I'm always nervous about it, and this makes me a bit of a pariah among my peers, is I always question the data. And I think it goes without saying all data is biased in one way or another. It was collected from a certain group of people. It's, by definition, dated. If it's been recorded, it's an event that's already happened. It also assumes that the future is going to look the same as the past. And even any forecasting that we do with data um, always tries to, it necessarily needs to be based on that data. And we ignore black swan events. We ignore changes in policy. We ignore any sort of exogenous factors. If it doesn't fit into the model, we don't do it. And from a machine learning perspective, what you're going to do first is you're going to throw a model all of the data that you have. You're going to say, if I look at this across history, what would have been the most important indicators? And we're going to use those to predict the future. And that works when you're looking at something like, what's the optimal price I can charge for a widget? The math is going to be much better than human intuition on something like that. So for individual discrete decision making, it's great. But when you're talking about big meaty questions like what is the competitive landscape for my product in the southern US under a Trump presidency? There is a lot of data out there on that, but that isn't going to easily go into a machine learning algorithm and spit out a response. There's all sorts of risks out there based on different geographies, based on different legal frameworks around generative AI. And there's all sorts of vicarious responsibility that a lot of my clients are starting to worry about. So, if you decide to platform on Elon Musk's large language model, and you're going to have vicarious responsibility from a PR perspective on that. There's so many things out there that you can't just take at face value without looking at the human elements. And when technology people get into it, instinctively, they think if I don't offer any interpretation, if I don't offer any uh, um, exogenous factors on this, if I let the data speak for itself, then I'm doing my best work and I give that over to the stakeholders to make their decision. And I think that that's another way that we absolve ourselves from responsibility. And we need to provide the data for sure, but we also need to provide caveats and limitations and our own interpretations. I think we have a lot to offer that we're a little scared to do that though.
Well, okay, so I love that. I love that. You're bringing up complexity and systems thinking and a whole bunch of other things that I think is
Mhm.
really, really important, that we not just sort of listen to the data and assume that it knows, right? I think that
Mhm.
that really sits well with me. Something you said earlier also about just being in the workplace, and how decisions get made and following, just the order that's in front of you to a T, and just sort of like the psychology of being in a workplace where technology is quite present. I feel like your book has also done some good work talking about loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness, and how to overcome that, and some of your thoughts on mindfulness, which I wasn't expecting to read in a book about technology and geeks with empathy. So tell me a little bit about why you felt that was those topics were important to include.
I think you're right. This isn't something I think technology people talk about, and I don't think it's covered enough in really any conversations. But I honestly think that loneliness is the theme of our time. I think we talk a lot about generative AI and social media and so on, but I think 100 years from now, looking back into the 2000s, this is going to be the age of loneliness. From what I've read, everything is on the decline. People spend less time with friends. They have fewer friends. They read fewer books. They're not as involved in volunteer activities. They don't seem to shop. They don't. I don't know where people are spending their time now, outside of content consumption. So we go on YouTube. We binge watch things on Netflix. We take a mental health day and we go into goblin mode and do nothing but watch TV for a couple days. And at the end of all of it, we don't feel any healthier, and we feel like we just need another goblin day or a little more content, and it'll get us there. But I think what it means for us is that we're crying out for human contact, and there's a void that we can't articulate and we can't really understand. So we go into the workplace, and the same thing has happened that I've described. We've gone from, Anita has a problem. I'm going to help solve that for her. We're going to go for coffee together and celebrate. It's a social event and it's a dopamine hit because we've both solved a problem, and that's great. That's natural. But we've deconstructed and devolved it to the point that Anita's problem gets communicated to somebody else and then to somebody else. 12 people turn some knobs. They never meet you. We can't ever go for coffee together. You don't meet the people helping you. They don't meet you. We are so divorced from each other that none of us get that feeling of satisfaction anymore. And we try to find companionship in whatever way it comes, and that's through relating to people YouTube channels and things on Netflix. And I think that that's something that's missing, especially from technical people, just because they've always, again, I'm going to do a gross generalization, but a lot of them come from being outside of the tight social circles in universities and in high schools and what have you. So they're probably already a little bit introverted, and then they get into the workforce, and now you are a fungible unit of production. You're not Jeremy anymore. You are senior developer level 3, and you're able to do these types of agile tickets. And that type of experience echoes throughout your life, I think. And if you start to develop empathy, if you start to insert yourself into these conversations so that you can see the outcome of your work and find dignity in it, I think that that too echoes through your life. And then for the mindfulness one, I think,
Can I just stop for just a second
yeah, of course.
to say how um, refreshing it is to hear somebody who really understands the landscape of technology and working with technological teams across different functions, but you are so articulating the need for humanizing the workplace so that people who do the work feel human and feel a sense of belonging and feel a sense of trust and social capital. And that's essentially what you're arguing. You're making that business case, not only the business case, but the human case. The case, you sound like a sociologist and a psychologist in a technologist, you know?
No, I appreciate that. I'm just a observer. I'm not educated in the topic, but I've certainly seen people suffering with this, and they don't have the words to express it, and they don't know why they're unhappy. And I strongly believe it all comes back to human touch points.
Right. So then you were moving into mindfulness, which is, a potential path for loneliness recovery, I guess.
Yeah, and it's thinking before you react, and we fall into that. I think it's just out of safety. Most technology teams work in an agile methodology. You know what you're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks. Somebody has given you very explicit instructions. You're going to move data from A to B. You're going to code some script. It makes perfect sense, but it's an external stimuli. You complete your ticket, you move on to the next ticket, move on to the next one. And the easiest possible thing to do is to come in on Monday at 9 o'clock. You have your stand-up meeting, you're told what to do. You do that, you send it back, and you can do that for 40 years, and you'll never have to think about a thing. You don't need to worry about your company, about your peers, your colleagues. You can skip the office Christmas party just as long as you fulfill those tickets. No one's ever going to bother you or talk to you, and you can go home and watch YouTube. And we've done that for a reason. Certainly, it's the best way to get disparate skill sets to align under a person that has a broader view. But it's taken so much away from the individual people that are actually doing it. And for them, they fall really quickly into that reactive mindset. I'm hungry, so I eat, I get a ticket, I fulfill. It's 10 o'clock, I go to bed, and I'll repeat the same thing again. And it's dangerous at that point when you've been in it for a while to take the time and reflect and say, is this the life I've designed for myself? In most cases, it's not. So I would say to those people, it's going to be painful to self-reflect in that case and to be mindful, but you need to do that, or you're going to, find that life slips you by. So take the time to journal, to read long form articles, to develop a moral imagination, to volunteer with groups outside of technology, and just get off the TikTok and try to develop outside of your Snowflake and AWS certificates, and then try to round yourself out.
Right, because what you're describing is not only an antidote to the feelings of loneliness and lack of purpose and a sense of belonging, but the upside to doing all of what you described is everything we want from life because we're meant to be out there feeling inspired and we're living creatures, right? So we want to have friendships, we want to have flourishing relationships. We want to feel like we wake up and, it's not, we don't hit the snooze button, but we're like, yay, another day. So the
Mm.
upside is so attractive. Why wouldn't we go for that, right? So yeah, thanks for framing that. And I don't think it's just technology people that would resonate with
Mm.
what you describe. It's people across all sorts of different business functions, which goes to, I think, speaks so much to that wave, at the beginning of COVID of what was it called? The mass, what was it called? Everybody
Oh,
retire, not like retire, leaving their jobs in a massive number.
quiet quitting or yeah.
Oh, not quiet quitting. It was something else. I can't remember. Quiet quitting happened if you stayed, where you're like
Okay.
only doing the minimum of what I need to do. I'm quietly quitting my job. What was it called? Anyways, it'll come to me. I'm sure people who are listening are like frustrated that I haven't thought of the word yet. But anyways, I'll put it in the show notes if I don't remember by the time this interview ends. So it's something else that caught my attention in your book. I'm going to skip a little bit. I want to make sure I get to as much as possible because I had a bunch of questions for you. Is that you mentioned the importance of understanding the generational differences in the workplace right now. There's five
Mm.
generations in the same workplace for the first time in human history. And that comes with, naturally, there's different values, different ways of working. Obviously, people have been exposed to different technology. The younger have only known all the technology, right? So what do you have to say about generational differences and the need for empathy there too?
Yeah, that was a difficult section to write because I didn't want to reinforce stereotypes, but at the same time, I think a lot of those stereotypes are right. We just have the wrong interpretation of them. And I've worked with a lot of baby boomers, and when you work with technology people, often they will just dismiss baby boomers. They think, they're at the end of their career. They don't understand what the future looks like. They want to hold on for a few more years. But what they don't understand is that the baby boomers are the ones that put those processes in place. They know what it looked like before that. They know why the processes are in place. And they have a historic view. They know what works, what doesn't work. And if we dismiss all of that as this is just a stodgy old dude that doesn't know what the future looks like, we're completely throwing away all of that wealth of experience and all of the connections that they have and the corporate influence as well. So we should never dismiss anybody. On the other side of it, with alphas and Gen Y type people, we say that they're lazy, they can't focus, and so on. But at the same time, I've worked with a few of them, and I've never seen such strong multitaskers. Like I worked with one in particular, and being a Gen X millennial borderline myself, I thought I'm going to ramp this guy up. So I'll give him one easy project. And then when that's accomplished, I'm going to give one more easy project. And that was the most stifling, mind-numbing possible work environment for this person. And they said, well, if you give me like 5 or 6 things, I'll be able to handle them. I said, no, let's start slow, one at a time. And it was just that complete misalignment of expectations. And finally, I took him at his word, gave him 5 things, and he hammered them all out. It's just a different type of working. The other one I find really, really often is ambivalence towards approach is seen as respect from a Gen X person. So they'll say, here's the outcome that I want. Now you go away and solve that. And what they're communicating with that is, I trust that you're going to be able to solve this. I trust that you're creative and here, go away. So a sign of great respect from a Gen X person, but for a millennial, for someone else that's more rapid fire on those interactions, they see that as this person doesn't care about me. They don't care about my development. They're giving me this because they don't want to do it. So it's shown as a sign of respect, but it's taken as disrespect. And I think we just need to, you know, be aware of the different working styles of the generations.
And so having empathy, trying to
Oh,
understand
yeah.
where they're coming from and what they're trying to accomplish. I love that. I absolutely love that. You also talk about technical posture, a
Yeah.
new term for me, but I recognized, these are like the early adopters and, following by the, late adopters, then the laggards. And just to tell you a story where I am on that little continuum. I was dating a man in my 20s for many years, and I moved to Singapore. And I moved in Singapore in 1999 to do my master's degree. And he said, "Oh, Anita, we're going to be in touch every day. We're going to be emailing, constantly. Don't worry." And I said, "I don't think you understand, but this email thing is not going to take off." And I really believed it, and I still have like paper agenda. Okay. That's where I record my appointments. Even though the calendar exists, I look at my paper agenda. So you know where I am on that continuum. But why is that important to know? Why should we know about these technical postures? And again, what role does empathy play?
Well, I think they come to things from different angles, and I've actually got a paper agenda myself, so I'm probably more aligned with you on the spectrum than I should be, given what I do for a living. But we take the path of least resistance, and for those technology groups that are more forward thinking, that they're more assertive in organizations, that they might be out there trying to sell things. And what they tend to do is they gravitate towards that easy sell, the innovators, the forward-thinking people, the ones that are naturally predisposed towards technology. And then when they need to, cross the chasm, and I stole this idea from a great book called Crossing the Chasm, when they try to move to those late adopters and those laggards, which really form the bulk of what you're going to see in the workplace, there's not that same level of enthusiasm. So very quickly, they can just dismiss all of those people, focus on the early adopters, or worse still, they'll say, well, this has a very concrete value proposition. So ELT, I need you just to mandate that they need to get on board with this. And horrible change management, horrible experience. And we're also throwing away, again, all of that knowledge from those late adopters. Because quite often, and I'm a late adopter myself, like I didn't even get a smartphone until probably 6 or 7 years ago. Um, when you throw away all of those concerns and all of that rationale, you're missing a huge amount of information and reasoning behind it. And you're not going to have as comprehensive a case. You're not going to have as robust of a solution. So there's some people who will monkey wrench on moral grounds. They don't like technology for its own sake. There's people certainly that you can burn a lot of time in trying to convince them that could be spent better elsewhere. But if your plan falls down in the face of the slightest opposition, then it's not the problem of the opposition. It's an issue with your plan. So we should take that in stride, and we should empathize with people, understand their concerns, understand their posture, their generational characteristics, take the whole picture of the person and try to understand where they're coming from, not just outright dismiss them and say, I'm right, you're wrong. They've always got a reason why they're objecting to something. And it's 99.9% of the time not a personal thing. They have an honest, genuine concern with the project that you need to understand if you're going to be successful.
Love that. Makes me wonder, like, I'm going to ask this question. This is not specifically in your book, but since we're having such a great conversation, I look at, so I wrote an entire chapter about technology and empathy, and I am skeptical about a lot of the direction that technology is taking us, precisely because we are humans interfacing with machines. And, there's this whole talk about, coding for empathy, making AI and machines more human. There's algorithms that will correct in real time something that you've written so that it sounds so that it's written in a way that has a higher EQ. So I understand the tools that are available to us, but I remember interviewing an expert on touch in the UK, and he was telling me that animals are very helpful in terms of regulating our nervous system. And even having a machine dog, it won't be as helpful as a real dog, but it's close enough that statistically it's worthwhile. It's like better than nothing.
Hmm.
I feel kind of like icky factor around what it would be like, when it's not if, it's a matter of when androids are going to be so close to human in terms of the texture of the skin and the temperature of the skin, and that humans will be having intimate relations with robots. I don't know. So
Yeah.
I just wonder what you think about that, like in the future, looking out forwards.
That's I love technology. I get into it for that reason, but technology exists to serve humans. It should elevate human dignity. It should, provide us joy. It should ease the burdens of daily life. It's there to serve us and not the other way around. And I think we've we've lost track of that in a really fundamental way. And there's a meme that goes around on the internet quite often that AI was supposed to do my taxes and clean my house so that I could focus on painting and poetry, but it's doing painting and poetry so that I can spend more time at work. And it's superficially funny, but there's an awful lot of truth to that. And I'm not at all artistically talented. I can't write poetry, but when a human being writes poetry, when they write a book, when they paint a picture, like someone's painting a picture of the landscape of Calgary, as they're painting it, that they're remembering a time they spent there with their family. And it might be a little spiritual, but I would like to think that that brushstroke captures something of that memory in the way that their hand flinches when they paint it. There's something beautiful to that, and I think that that's a very important expression of humanity when you do that. But if I go to Dolly and I say, paint me a picture of the Calgary skyline in the style of, pick your favorite artist, the output's going to be cool, but it's not art. It's an amalgamation of a bunch of data that's on the internet. It's not at all a replacement for the great artists who, spend their time and their energy developing those skills and being able to articulate their artistic impression. If we throw that away because it's so much easier to tell Dolly to paint us a picture, we're losing something far, far more important than anything we're going to get out of having androids and whatnot. So that's a big fear of mine as well. I think I go against a lot of my peers by saying that, but I think we should really, really interrogate what we're using this for before we go full hog into it.
So you sound like a philosopher with that answer. And now I'm going to just ask for the sake of, people who might be curious, what is your work? What do you do? Because, you're a strategy consultant. So what do you
Yeah.
do?
Well, I do a lot of things. I teach corporate strategy at the University of New Brunswick. I help Eastern Canadian Automotive Retail Group with their reporting and analytics. I do AI strategy consulting and I advise a few startups. But I think, overarching all of that is I try to get the most out of technology to serve people. And I think that distinction is critical. It needs to help customers, it needs to help stakeholders, but it needs to help the employees too, so that we're being rewarded together through this journey and not coming out on the other end in some technical dystopia. So,
Love that. So I
yeah,
have two more questions for you.
thanks.
It's been such a pleasure to chat with you, Jeremy. I had no idea that we would go so profound. Um, you have in your book not only 5 tips for being empathic, you have 5 tips for leveraging empathy. We won't go through all 10. I would invite people to pick up a copy. But I wonder if you might want to talk about one tip that you find particularly exciting to share or useful to share?
I think the biggest one, if really I had one takeaway from all this, and then one thing I would suggest to people is positive attribution.
Mhm.
If we have a predisposition as people to always assume the worst of other people. If Anita's late for a meeting, it's because she's irresponsible. If I'm late for a meeting, My kids were, not having their breakfast. It was late drop off at the daycare. I caught every red light. Mine's excused, but yours isn't. And that carries through in a lot of ways. And in technology, very often, again, we run into roadblocks and we say, this person is an obstacle because they're a bad person and they dislike me. And when we do that, we dismiss everything behind it. We dismiss their rationale. We dismiss any gaps in what we've put together. And we say, well, that's just a bad person because they're against me. And, it's bad from the project perspective, but it is bad for an individual as well, because, I write off this person, that's a bad person. Another project, I write off someone else. All of a sudden, I'm surrounded by bad people. And you can find yourself later on, very slowly over the years being surrounded by bad people, and they're all out to get you just because you've made those individual decisions that have negative attributions to the person. So even if nothing else comes from it, if you assume the best of people, you assume that they have a good moral foundation for why they're standing in your way on this, you're going to be a happier person. You're going to find that you're surrounded by people who, they might disagree with you, but they have the best of intentions. It might not impact anything at all in your life, but you'll find that you're surrounded by happier, better people just by making that positive attribution. So I don't know where that tip lands in the book, but I think that would be the main one I would encourage anybody
Well,
to
it's the
follow.
number one in the list of five
There
in
you go.
that sequence, right? So, and I think that's just a good way of being in the world, franchement,
Yeah.
as we would say in French. Jeremy, the last question I'll ask, and I ask it of all my guests, this is a podcast devoted to purposeful empathy. If you could think of a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
Yeah, and yeah, I struggled with that a little when your producer sent me that question. I've had a lot of people in my corner, and the obvious answer is the one that called me a turnip. I think that was a really important experience. I needed it, but one that I've kept coming back to over the past 20 years was a cranky old chef that I used to work for. And my first career aspiration was actually to be a chef. I spent years cooking before I went to university. And even when I was in university, I paid my way through by cooking. And the chef that I worked under, he was a cantankerous old chain smoking Swiss chef. He was like a more subdued but emotionally damaging Gordon Ramsay. I learned a lot. He was an amazing man, but he was mean and he said some stuff that, they would make anyone in HR flinch. But I'd been at this restaurant for a few years and I was doing split shifts. So I was already checked out. I didn't care about cooking anymore. And on a day that I had a huge blow up with him, we had worked together until about 11 o'clock the night before. I was back in the restaurant at about 6 and I ended up staying all day. So, I'd been working over 12 hours. I was going on less than 5 hours sleep. He was going on even less than that. The restaurant was full. I didn't care anymore. And I remember specifically that I was doing a side salad of mixed greens for a steak, and I pushed it over to him and he hands it back to me and he says, "There's no radicchio." And he was super angry with me. And I didn't often snap at him, but I did this time. And I said, it's purple friggin' lettuce. Like, who cares? We have to get these plates out. And he gave me this death stare, and I got the purple lettuce down. But afterwards, he gives me a talk that went over my head at the time. But what he said was, we might have 1,000 dishes go out a week, but for those people, it might be a graduation celebration. It might be a first date. It might be a funeral. It might be a 50th wedding anniversary. Who knows? So, for them, it's a very, very important event and everything needs to be perfect for them. So, like I said, I didn't care at the time, but that stuck with me in the back of my mind for about 20 years. And that's a level of consistent empathy that really I still personally struggle with. This guy's been working 80 hours a week for the past 50 years and an angry dude for sure, but he puts as much care into every little side salad that he does because I think deep down he loves being part of those little human events, and he wants at least his piece of that to be perfect. So that's how I try to approach my work now. We might deliver 50 projects a month, so it's really easy to get desensitized. You've seen it all before, but for the consumer of those products, it might be every couple years that they end up seeing us. So we need to treat every one of those interactions like it's our first and only, and make sure that we're remembering the purple lettuce. So that's my story. That the chef probably has no idea that he influenced me with that as much as he did, or that it changed my management style 20 years later. But I think that there's a lot of depth in what he said, and I think it's a reminder anybody could benefit from.
Wow. And again, coming full circle to the top of the conversation, I think what I'm really enjoying about meeting you and getting to know you is that you've flipped some really hard moments where you'd have every right to feel shame or frustration or disappointment, and you've reframed it as an opportunity for growth and learning, and it's driven you to a better place as a result, as a human and as a professional. So love that story. Do you want to put a shout out to a name in a restaurant, or rather not?
Rather not. I don't want to get in trouble. Be scary. So yeah.
I love it. Love it. Love it.
Mm.
Jeremy, I'm going to have information in the show notes. People who want to get in touch with you, I really recommend picking up Geeks with Empathy. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck with all your work ahead. It was lovely to chat.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
So everyone, thank you for listening and watching, and we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. Thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Please now consider subscribing or buying a copy of Purposeful Empathy. Thanks again. Have a great day.